Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders is discussing or summons his team to discuss a 2020 run. Now this is somewhat comical to me because ultimately everyone knew that Bernie Sanders was already thinking about a run. Even going so far, I think it was several months ago in the Hill, saying that Bernie Sanders wanted to run. He didn't necessarily want Joe Biden to run. He thought it was his turn. Essentially, this is the house that Bernie Sanders built, and I want to live in the house that I built. That type of thing. Um, I'm gonna read the story, but the story is funny. It's what it boils down to in a nutshell is Bernie Sanders summons his team to tell him what he already knows. That if he decides to run as a Democrat in 2020, that he would already go in as a front party leader. But let's take a look at the story. This is one of those days where it's like, kind of goes without being said. Bernie Sanders summons his team to discuss 2020. Although the Vermont senator hasn't made a decision, sources say he wants to be ready if he throws his hat into the ring. Now, one more thing on this. There's certain legal consequences associated with saying that you're going to run for the presidency. Many of these candidates often hold this until the last minute. This would be remarkably early, but I suspect it's remarkably early because he wants to get ahead of the field. You have a lot of people who think Donald Trump is a weak link or a weak duckling as a president. And that, for the most part, I have always said a ham sandwich could beat Donald Trump. Where you're going to have a bunch of ham sandwiches and some actual real candidates, meaning Sanders, I will call Sanders a real candidate, that's going to run for this contest. So I guess under a field like this where you're going to have a lot of Democrats throwing their head into the ring trying to get in on taking out Trump, is it crazy throwing his hat on the ring early on? Probably not. But at the end of the day, it's something I think that we already understood or already knew. Part of the reason Sanders was buffing up on his foreign policy credentials was to run. I mean, that's a straightforward nod in this idea of running for office. One of the things that knocked against him or people were using to hit him with was foreign policy. Foreign policy. This guy only talks about economics. What about foreign policy? Well, he's been beefing up his foreign policy bona fides, going so far as to have speeches. I think it was last month. He had a very big speech a month or so ago on foreign policy. Let's look at the article, though, and let's talk about it after. Bernie Sanders convened his top political advisors in Washington on Saturday for a planning meeting that included a discussion of the feasibility and shape of a possible 2020 presidential election. Half a dozen of Democratic senior Democrats familiar with the gathering confirmed to Politico. The top-line message the Vermont senator received from the operatives gathered during the government shutdown was a more formal version of one they've been giving him regularly for months. You would be one of the frontrunners for the Democratic nomination, and if you want to run, it's time to start seriously planning accordingly. The Democratic Socialist response to a series of presentations, according to multiple Democrats, I haven't yet made a decision about 2020, but I still think beating Donald Trump is the most important thing for this country, and I want to be ready if I do decide to run. Sanders regularly speaks with a close group of advisors and periodically brings top allies in to discuss his political maneuvers, but Saturday's get-together included planning for the rest of 2018 as well as specifically slated for 2020 component, said Democrats familiar with the session, which was scheduled for the one-year anniversary of Trump's inauguration. Part of the discussion including gaming out how the rest of the field might look, since the 2016 landscape effectively pitting Sanders against Clinton was far more straightforward than the expected 2020 free-for-all. This is exactly my point. They're expecting a ton of people to get into the race. I mean, you're talking about Kamala Harris, Kristen Gillibrand. Some people are thinking Elizabeth Warren. Some people are thinking Cory Booker, or maybe this kind of dark horse, no pun intended. So this field would be far more expansive than the field that he was running against in regards to Clinton and Sanders. But I agree with his campaign advisors on this. Come on. Certainly you're going to be one of the top runners. And there's a reason why these guys continuously try to rub themselves in some Bernie Sanders, because the guy's the most popular senator in the United States in spades. The country understands that Bernie Sanders was cheated. Sanders going into the next 2020 primary, providing there's no shenanigans or anything else, yeah, I would imagine Bernie Sanders would be a top runner. And if Sanders runs, I've made this point over and over and over again, and I've diverted from this in no way, he would get my full-throated support. He would get my full-throated and absolute support. It's not to say that I don't necessarily like some of the things Sanders did. I don't like this Russian garbage. I don't like the idea of him backing Hillary Clinton at the end of the process. I don't like any of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I do look at Sanders as having fundamentally changed the debate in the United States. Whatever knocks you want to take against the guy, it is impossible to make that argument that what Sanders has done has not been this kind of revolutionary change in the view of economic or the view of politics in the United States. There is left-leaning legislature that wouldn't even be talked about at first that is now, I guess you could say, this kind of political force or the political will of pushing Democrats into a particular position in regards to potentially supporting it. I'm talking about healthcare. I'm talking about college to some degree. Yeah, if Sanders runs in 2020, Bernie Sanders has my support in 2020. Richard Wolff came out early on and said that Bernie Sanders was going to run, that he was going to announce. I have no reason to know why Richard Wolff would make that up. So whatever deliberations he has going on behind the scenes, I suspect that it's probably more likely true than not. All of this seems, like I said, slightly comical to me. I mean, there's some stuff and there's moves that Bernie Sanders is making that I don't think you would make under normal circumstances. So what's the point of him doing foreign policy speeches? What is the point of the reporting saying that the guy didn't want Biden to run? He himself wanted to take that slot. So I understand, though, to some degree, this is politics. And he has to converge his team to tell him exactly what he and the rest of the world, or at the very least the United States, already knows. If you throw your hat into the ring in 2020, you start on day one as a front runner. So I will leave it at that. And mind you, they're going to attack him across the board. They've already come out with this idea of Bernie Sanders is sexist. Bernie Sanders, I mean, some of this stuff is insane. Bernie Sanders is too old. That was the other one. We need young blood into this contest. We need young blood. I mean, all this stuff. They're going to try to come up with any excuse whatsoever as to attack the guy. And you're probably going to find social media flipping out certain elements of the Democratic Party, flipping out these kind of shadow wars going on between, you can say, the right-wing element of the party as opposed to the more lefty elements. At the end of the day, though, the guy starts off as number one, front runner. And I think it would be a shame to let that go to waste. So I hope he doesn't back out of throwing his hat into the ring in 2020. I hope he still is going through with it. I hope that Hill article's reporting was right. I hope Richard Wolff was right when saying that these guys was going to run. And I suspect his team, and I suspect Bernie Sanders knows himself, that all things being equal, providing his health and everything else keeps up, Bernie Sanders was probably going to run in 2020. So I'm going to leave it at that. I know not everyone agrees with my take on the Bernie Sanders thing, and that's perfectly okay. Well, of course, that's perfectly okay. But the guy has my support, so I will leave it at that. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys.